And when Darnold was back, he was motivated. He was ready to show up, and they had really more offense than they have had in a long time. So I felt like that was a tough moment for the Cowboys, because it's like, oh, we're not just going to be able to roll over everybody. So Justin, to your point, I don't know that I can put this all on Garrett. I've never been all in on Garrett anyway. I think he's kind of in the system, and he's the boy, right? But you've got a couple of things going on here, and I'll keep it brief. One, injuries. Amari Cooper has been hobbled all year. Gallup, the guy that they thought would step up, he's actually been battling some nagging injuries, and he has some huge drop issues. That certainly hurts Dak Prescott, who is still leading QBR for the NFL. So take that as you will, especially with the fact that Dak is still playing without a bigger contract. He wants that extension. He hasn't got it yet. So he's still giving you, I think, as much as he can, but he's in a tough spot. Ezekiel Elliott, Justin, to me, Ezekiel doesn't look like the same Zeke from, his rookie year or even bright spots in the last couple of years. I think that hurts the team when you have a guy that just got loaded with the Brinks truck and he's not performing. And then, Justin, my final point is defensively, they're just simply not there. They're middle of the road. If you look at team defensive stats, yards given up per game, turnovers, and then overall defense, middle of the pack the whole way through. And when you have guys on your team like Lawrence who are making $100 million, to me, that's just simply unacceptable.
I think with Dallas, you have to press the pause button a little bit because of the injuries to the O-line, especially with Smith and Collins out. Look, it was one of the reasons I felt like they shouldn't go pay Zeke Elliott the money that they did, because they've have so much money invested in this line that they can make a lot of backs look better than they probably are. And I think you're seeing that now, that once Smith went out and now Collins went out against the Packers in that game, the running game for Dallas just really hasn't been there and hasn't been consistent. And then you factor in that Gallup has been in and out of the lineup. He's come back. Now Cooper is out of the lineup. Randall Cobb missed the game on Sunday. They have had a lot of injuries to their key positions. Talked about with the Chiefs last week. We can talk about with Dallas now. When you have certain players on your team that you're paying a lot of money and you're paying a premium price for, it's hard to get backups and hard to get depth because you're getting undrafted guys or you're getting late round guys because they're the cheapest contracts that you can have. But when your starters then go out and you're trying to depend on these guys, it's a mixed bag, Eric. I don't think you ever really know what you're going to get. So I'm down on this team, especially on the defensive side. I don't trust them right now, but I would like to see what this team looks like once they get at least their O-line back up and running, because I think that will change things. I think Dak will have more time. I think the running game will start to work. Play action will work off of that as well. They can get Dak out of the pocket a little bit more. But right now, they're in a free fall. I do put some of this on Garrett because when you lose 3 in a row, it seems to be, especially the way they lost 2 in a row, and the way that they just fell apart with their running defense against Green Bay and let Aaron Jones run all over them, you would have thought coming into play the Jets that it would have been a get-right spot for them. And they were just completely flat, which tells me that they just weren't up with coaching. And I've heard even Chris Long talk about the fact that some of his sources in Dallas say that they practice really hard as the team run down. So maybe this team has given up on Jason Garrett. I think as a player, Eric, if all the time you're constantly hearing about that the coach is on the hot seat, or is he going to make it through this week? Is he going to make it through the season? At some point, if you don't like that coach because of the way he's practicing you, or you don't like the game plans or whatever, the message stops resonating with the team and they start to lose the locker room. We talk about the Falcons with that same thing with Dan Quinn, where it's pretty clear he's lost that team. Whatever he is saying, especially to the defense, isn't resonating. It's not working. The scheme's not working. They're not buying into him. So if this team doesn't make changes, I don't know that there's anybody on that staff that's ready to take over. I do think his job is definitely in jeopardy because the expectations for this team, all the money that they paid to Zeke, Jerry wants them to make a deep playoff run. And at this point, I don't even think you can trust them to be a playoff team. So they are definitely going to have to get things turned around. Look, they've got 10 games left. They started out bad last year. They made the Cooper trade and they turned everything around. I don't know if this team's got that kind of trade in them, but they may need to do something, especially on the defensive side. And Eric, a team that has also dropped 3 in a row that did decide to make a change on the defensive side, that was the Rams. They had a home game versus the Niners and a spot that looked like, okay, they've dropped 2 in a row. They have a division rival coming in off of a huge win. Maybe it's a spot that the Niners are a little flat. They were not. The Rams were the team that was flat. Jared Goff didn't even pass for 80 yards, which in today's NFL seems pretty much impossible. But Eric, 3 losses in a row. And this week they decide, hey, we're going to push all our chips into the center of the table. They make the move to go get Jalen Ramsey. They ship Marcus Peters out of town. So, Eric, is Jalen Ramsey the cure that this team needs to kind of right the ship? Or do you feel like maybe they have a little bit of the dreaded Super Bowl hangover from losing that Super Bowl, and this really isn't going to fix it?
I don't think it's really going to fix it. I think it's a bit of a panic move for me, and it's a really high price to pay. 2 first-round picks. I just don't see this being the big revolutionary move that it would have been if, like, the Eagles or the Chiefs pick up a Jalen Ramsey. So, to me, I do feel, though, a bit more down on the Rams than I even do on teams like the Cowboys or the Chiefs. But 6 games in, you see some things that start to jump off the page at you that is very concerning. Cam Newton in week 1 took them to a 27-30 game, and we now know that Cam Newton was just about in the ambulance that game just because it was falling apart. The Rams only won that game by 3 points. Didn't really look that bad against New Orleans, but didn't really do that much against Cleveland. And then Tampa Bay, they let them hang 55 on them. Seattle, they could have won that game. I mean, we'll go back and we'll reassess that. Yeah, Zerline should have made that kick and all that stuff. So, okay, the Seattle game could have gone one way or the other. But again, they let a team score 30 on them. And we're talking about defense here with Ramsey. And then the Niners scored 20 on them. Meanwhile, as you pointed out, Goff and the offense was just anemic. I mean, I just haven't seen anything quite like that in today's NFL. So, Justin, I'll keep this short and sweet. I'm a lot more down on the Rams right now, and I could go deeper than that. I could go with the fact that, look, I appreciate that ownership is willing to invest in the team and say, hey, we're all in. We paid Cooks. We'll pay Ramsey. We will pay these guys. We'll pay Gurley. We'll get you what you need. But then you look at the utilization. What has Brandon Cooks done? I drafted him in fantasy because I thought he's going to have a big year. All they do is go to Cooper Kupp all the time. Maybe throw in a little bit of Robert Woods. Cooks doesn't do anything for me at all. So it's great that you're investing in these guys, but if you're not using them appropriately, and if they don't use Jalen Ramsey appropriately, or if it doesn't really make a difference on their defense, they're investing a lot in something that may or may not make any bit of difference. That's where we're going to find out who the Rams are. And they've got 2 easy games coming up, the Falcons and the Bengals. But I got to tell you, Justin, their schedule after their bye is pretty hard. So we're going to find out if the Rams are for real or if they've just spent a lot of money to be, maybe we'll win the NFC West and maybe we won't.
Do you think they're regretting the Jared Goff extension at all?
No, I wouldn't say that yet. I think Goff's progression has been so good over the past year or two compared to where he started under Fisher that it's hard to say they can regret that. I mean, you watch those games, he makes some pretty good throws. I just don't think he's spreading it around to everybody as much as he could, but I think his throws are pretty good when I watch him. But I'm not an offensive coordinator. I can't really break it down the way that some of these guys can. And maybe there is a regression again after what they did picking it up last year. But you talk about all the time, some of these quarterbacks, you get a year or two where defenses can watch them and scheme against them. Now we've seen McVay and Goff kind of take the world by storm. Maybe there's some of that happening where defenses say, okay, we know this trick. We know this trick. We know this trick. And potentially it's affecting them. But how can I really say that when Goff 2 weeks ago had, 540 yards or something passing? So I think the 80 yards is an anomaly, but I think it's something to keep an eye on for sure.
I just think if you're going to pay somebody $36 million a year, that 78 yards is unacceptable. And what he went out against a division rival and did and how bad he looked, you can go back and listen to podcasts from last year. The 2 guys that I've had the most question marks on that I'm not bought into is Jared Goff and Mitchell Trubisky. Goff ended up getting paid, and it seems like the Bears aren't really sure which direction they want to go with Trubisky. But to give him that kind of extension, and then you hear the talk of, how McVay is in his head up until 15 seconds left on the play clock, and he's kind of just force-feeding him information, telling him where to go with the football. It just feels like this far along in his career, and if you're going to give him that kind of extension, he should need that kind of hand-holding. Whatever he is doing, it's not really working. And you saw the Patriots in the Super Bowl. They just took it to him. And McVay had no answers. Goff had no answers in that game. And look, there were some missed catches and there was opportunities there. But the fact is they put up 3 points. To come out against the Niners and to play like that at home when you're relatively healthy outside of Gurley not in the lineup, but you've got your full complement of receivers, tight ends, and to have that kind of performance, there's a lot of questions for me of what this Rams team, it feels like they jumped the gun on this extension because I think they could have at least waited longer. I mean, you got to look at least what Dallas has done. They haven't jumped the gun and gone and went crazy with Dak in the first 3 weeks and just gave him $38 million a year or something crazy like that because of his performance. But I feel like LA did jump the gun, just like they jumped the gun on Gurley. So that's why some of these moves with Ramsey, okay, I get it. You're probably going to have later picks in the first round. What player are you going to draft that's going to be as good as Ramsey? But you just gave up 2 firsts, and you're going to have to sign him to a big extension. I don't necessarily know if that's the move that's going to turn this team around. He can't play O-line. They're banged up on the offensive line. They don't have a consistent running game like they did when Gurley was healthy, that they could get him out in the passing game. They could use the play action, and he was a great running back. They just don't have that component there. And I do think that Goff has a little bit of that Carson Wentz with Zach Ertz, especially that we saw the last 2 years in Philly. Not as much this year, but where he seemed like he only had eyes for Ertz. And Ertz is getting 150 targets a year, but they're not really productive targets. They weren't really doing a lot for the offense. And it feels like early in the season, teams were kind of getting tricked into the Cooper Kupp, and he was having multiple touchdown games. He was just forcing the ball into him on Sunday, Eric, and the Niners were draped all over him. So I think there's definitely cause for concern there. Look, we talked about it last week with this Rams team. Their schedule the next few weeks isn't very difficult at all. Kind of gets harder towards the end of the year, but they definitely have some games where they can right this ship and they can turn their season around. And the way that everybody is so tightly bunched in the NFC, if they rip off 3 or 4 straight, they're going to be in a lot better position. But right now, Eric, they're staring up at the Niners with a loss to them. Same with Seattle, staring up with a loss to them. So they've got a lot of work to do. They got a big hole to dig out of. And now you bring Jalen Ramsey in, who's maybe has a back injury, maybe doesn't. Didn't want to play for Jacksonville, is definitely going to want to become the highest paid corner in the league. And you just put Talib on IR and you ship Peters out of town. So who's playing the other corner position at this point? And none of them can play offensive line. They just traded for one of those who the Browns couldn't use. And they're terrible on the offensive line, Eric. So there's a lot of questions on this team. So let me ask you about the Niners. They're 5-0. Our boy Richard Sherman was yapping again and running his mouth as he normally does. We weren't really bought into the Niners, but are you buying into this team?
I tell you, the most
now?
Impressive thing about them, and all you have to do is look at the stats, it's the defense. Who knew that the Niners, the Patriots, some of those teams would have dominant defenses? I mean, we knew the Bears, right? We kind of figure some of these teams, the Packers look pretty good, but the Niners, I mean, they're holding their opponents to crazy low totals and allowing their offense to be productive. Their offense is averaging almost 30, possibly over 30. I didn't do the math here, but their offense is really putting up points. And then when you're holding the Rams to 7 and the Browns to 3 and the Bucks, who hung 55 on the Rams, they held them to 17. So I think that's a very helpful thing for the Niners, and it helps them build an identity. I didn't go into this season thinking that the Niners were all about defense. During our previous shows, I was talking about guys like, well, what can Garoppolo do coming off his injury? What can guys like Coleman add to the running game and Breda? Are we going to see a lot out of Goodwin? I mean, but they're seeming to piece everything together on offense. Obviously, Kittle's a big force, but those aren't the names we're talking about. We're now talking about team defense, giving them every opportunity to win when their offense is on the field, because their offense isn't forced into scoring a lot of points. They are scoring a lot of points, but they aren't forced into it. And I think that's a huge momentum builder for this team. And when you start them off at 5-0 like that, and they've still got a pretty tough schedule going ahead, although maybe an easier one this week against the Redskins, who fell into a win last week. But after that, it gets a little bit tougher. So again, we're going to find out, are the Niners for real? And if their defense continues to play like this, I'd have to say that they are.
Well, their defense should be good. I mean, my God, I feel like they've drafted in the top 10 for the last 10 years, and they've taken a defensive player. It feels like every single year. So I think it is the culmination of that you get that front 7 built up. Then you can go out in free agency. You can bring some pieces in. You're still drafting guys into the organization. That helps you with your cap numbers. And 10 years is probably a little bit of an over exaggeration, but at least the last 5 years where a lot of those guys you haven't had to pay yet, and you've got a lot of depth across the entirety of your defense. It's not just like they're one position group. They're really strong. They're good up front, good in the linebacker position. The secondary is good as well. So I think that's really helping them. And the fact, Eric, that they're